Welcome back to Airgun Academy. As I've mentioned before, scope sights are very popular with today's airgunners. In the past few episodes, we've covered some of the basics in regards to scopes. For this episode, we'll continue our discussion with a focus on adjustment. Since scopes perform their best when properly adjusted, this episode is very important. Come on, let's check it out. Before you even mount the scope on your gun, you should adjust the eyepiece to your eye. This is the most important scope adjustment, but it's one that almost nobody ever does. The eyepiece of all quality scopes and most budget scopes can be turned for adjustment. To adjust the scope, look at a blank, light-colored surface like a wall. Your intention here is not to look at the wall, but to determine whether the reticle is in focus. Often, a blurry reticle will appear as 2 or more lines in each direction instead of 1. Turn the eyepiece until the reticle sharpens. But don't look through the scope for too long because your brain will eventually focus the reticle for you. Look through for a few seconds, adjusting the eyepiece as you go. After the reticle has been made as sharp as possible using the eyepiece adjustment, all the other scope adjustments can be made. And remember, you won't need to readjust the eyepiece unless someone else alters the adjustment. Whether the parallax adjustment is on the objective bell or the left side of the scope, it should now adjust perfectly. On some inexpensive scopes, you may not be able to focus on any range short of infinity, but don't change the eyepiece adjustment in order to correct this. Instead, adjust the adjustable objective until the image in the scope is as sharp as you can get it. The yardage indicated on the AO bell or side wheel knob should now be pretty close to the actual distance of whatever is in focus through the scope. Many airgunners use this type of adjustment as a poor man's rangefinder. However, you should be aware that this type of adjustment changes as the temperature changes. The poor man's rangefinder isn't perfect. It is, however, a very good approximation. Not to mention, this type of adjustment can get extremely close to actual yardage with higher magnification scopes. Now, let's take a look at adjusting the windage and elevation knobs. As we discussed from our past episodes, adjusting these knobs can change where the pellet impacts. Before you adjust these knobs, here are a few things you need to know. These knobs move the impact of the pellet by a certain amount. That amount is given on the scope as minute of angle. For example, a scope may have quarter-minute clicks. Let me explain. A minute of angle is very close to 1 inch at 100 yards. A scope with quarter-minute clicks will move the pellet by 1/4 inch at 100 yards per click. But airgunners seldom shoot that far. At 50 yards, a quarter-minute adjustment moves the pellet 1/8 of an inch or half of what we'd expect at 100 yards. At 10 yards, each quarter-minute click moves the pellet by 1/10 of a quarter of an inch. So, at 10 yards, we have to adjust either the vertical or horizontal adjusting knobs by 10 clicks in order to move the strike of the pellet by 1/4 of an inch. When you sight in, you'll have to calculate how far each click will move the pellet. This can get confusing, so let me show you a simpler way. Clicks on scopes are not exactly as represented. Instead of trying to calculate how far each click will move the pellet, simply dial in several clicks in the correct direction to move the pellet where you want it to go. When you get close to where you want the pellet to impact, start moving the adjustments a few clicks at a time. Now, let me warn you about 2 of the situations that can happen when scope adjustments go bad. The reticle lines are inside a tube called the erector tube. As you can see, the erector tube is inside the scope tube. Opposite the adjustment knobs are coiled springs that push on the other side of the erector tube. When the scope is adjusted too high or too far to the right, all of the compression in this spring relaxes. The result is that the erector tube moves freely when the gun fires. This will give you an ever-changing point of impact. You can feel when this spring relaxes in the adjustment knobs because the clicks start getting mushy and may even stop clicking altogether. A scope that's adjusted either too high or too far to the right will not hold a zero. It's essential that the scope knobs always click crisply when they're turned. If you can't adjust the scope enough to get the desired point of aim without completely relaxing the adjustment spring, you'll need to do something different to adjust the scope. We'll cover that procedure, which is adjusting the scope using the mounts, in another episode. If you're new to scopes, here's a problem that you may not be aware of. On many scopes, the adjustments that you make may not take effect until the gun is fired several times. This is called adjustment lag. The erector tube doesn't move when the adjustments are made, but the vibration of the subsequent shot or two jostles it into the new position. Remember this and always take 3 or more shots after each scope adjustment to give the adjustments an opportunity to catch up. Some shooters deliberately bump their scopes following an adjustment. If you get it right, sometimes the scope will move into the new position before the first shot is fired. The final adjustment is a quick one. It's to set the level of illumination when you're using an illuminated reticle. Always select the lowest level of illumination. That will preserve your night vision and give you the smallest point of intersection as an aim point. In this episode, we've discussed how to adjust the eyepiece, how to adjust for correct parallax, how to adjust scope reticles. We went over common problems like adjusting too high and too far to the right and adjustment lag. And finally, we went over how to adjust correct illumination for reticles. Don't forget to check out Pyramyd Air online for all of your airgun and accessory needs. Thanks for watching Airgun Academy. Stay tuned for another great lesson from Pyramyd Air.